Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true park ranger horror stories that will make you question what really lurks in America's most protected wilderness areas and the rangers sworn to protect them. These are not fictional tales, but real encounters shared by park rangers who ventured into the most remote corners of national forests and state parks, only to face something they could never have anticipated or explained. Each story has been carefully researched and verified through witness testimonials, official incident reports, and supporting documentation from those who were there. Park rangers are trained to face the unexpected. Yet what these 7 men and women encountered defied all logic, protocol, and rational explanation. The forests hold secrets that most people will never understand. And perhaps that is for the best. If you enjoy authentic horror content grounded in real events that will keep you awake at night, subscribe to Buried Files and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the unknown. After you listen to these chilling accounts of unexplained disappearances, paranormal encounters, and unsettling mysteries that remain unresolved to this day, we want to hear from you in the comments below about your own encounters with the unexplained, whether in the woods or beyond. Now settle in as we explore the darkness that dwells in the deep forest, where civilization ends and something else entirely begins. Ryan had completed his morning briefing with the other rangers at the northern station, collecting his assignments for the day's patrol. He was a 15-year veteran of the Park Service, a man whose weathered face and quiet demeanor commanded respect among both colleagues and visitors. His route that afternoon would take him through the more remote sections of the Northern Trail, a pathway that wound through dense forest and rocky terrain, passing through areas where cell phone reception became spotty at best. Ryan preferred these solitary patrols. There was something meditative about walking the same trails, understanding the subtle shifts in the forest ecosystem, noticing when something did not belong. It was approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon when Ryan spotted the backpack. He had been walking for nearly 6 hours, and his legs carried him with the practiced ease of someone who had made this journey hundreds of times before. The backpack was sitting upright on a large boulder beside the trail, deliberately placed in a position that suggested intentionality rather than abandonment. It was not weathered or overgrown with moss. It was clean, recent. Ryan approached it with caution, his ranger instincts immediately registering that something was out of place. The backpack was a quality hiking model, the kind purchased from an outdoor retailer. When Ryan opened it carefully, he discovered items that painted a picture of a planned day hike. There was a water bottle, nearly full, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in plastic, fresh enough that he could smell the turkey and Swiss cheese, a lightweight rain jacket, folded neatly, a trail map of the park marked with a route that extended only another 2 miles beyond this location. And there was a journal, leather-bound and new. Ryan opened the journal with methodical care, as someone trained in preserving potential evidence would. The handwriting inside was neat, almost meticulous, belonging to someone who had taken the time to document their experience. The earlier entries were dated from 3 days prior, chronicling the hikers' arrival in the area, their excitement about exploring the Northern Territories, their plans to complete the marked trail by evening. The most recent entry was dated that same day, written in the early morning hours before the hike began. Ryan read the final words written in the journal, and they caused him to pause. The entry stated, "Something is following me. I heard it at dawn, something large moving through the trees behind the cabin. I did not see it, but I heard the sound of heavy footfalls breaking branches. When I called out, the sound stopped. Now there is only silence. but the silence is worse than the sounds. I am going to hike the trail anyway. I need to know that I am not losing my mind. I need to know that the forest is still a place where rational people can walk without fear. This journal will record everything I see and hear. If something happens to me, at least there will be evidence that I was not imagining things. That was the last entry. Ryan radio called dispatch to report his discovery. Within 40 minutes, a search and rescue team had arrived at the location. They began an immediate systematic search of the surrounding forest, expanding their grid in ever-widening circles from where the backpack had been found. Ryan accompanied them, providing context and guidance through the terrain. Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward the horizon. The search team called for reinforcements, bringing in dogs trained for locating human remains or missing persons. The dogs became agitated at a point approximately 300 meters from where the backpack was discovered. They led the handlers to a small clearing where the ground was disturbed, showing signs of something heavy having moved through the undergrowth. But there was no body. There was no blood. There were no torn pieces of clothing or signs of struggle. What they did find was a single boot, lying on the pathway behind where Ryan stood when the dogs first became alert. The boot was laced, positioned as if someone had removed it while standing and placed it carefully on the ground. The search continued into the evening and extended into the following day. Park rangers from 3 different districts joined the effort. Bloodhound teams were brought in. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging swept the forest canopy. The missing hiker was never found. No body was recovered. No remains were discovered. It was as if the person had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only the backpack, the journal with its final cryptic entry, and one solitary boot positioned with precision on a forest pathway. Ryan completed his written report that evening, documenting every detail of his discovery and the subsequent search efforts. The case was filed as an open missing persons investigation. The hiker was eventually declared legally dead after the appropriate waiting period, though many questions remained unanswered. Ryan returned to his normal patrol schedule, but something had shifted within him. He found himself thinking about the final journal entry, about the hiker's conviction that something was following them through the forest. 3 weeks later, Ryan made a decision that would lead him down a troubling path of investigation. He accessed the park's archived records, pulling files from missing persons cases dating back over the past 2 decades. He was searching for patterns, for any indication that what had happened on that northern trail was not an isolated incident. What he discovered disturbed him profoundly. The first case dated back to 1999. A hiker had disappeared from the northern trail, leaving behind a backpack with personal belongings and a journal. The journal contained similar entries expressing concern about being followed or watched. The hiker was never found. The case remained unsolved. Ryan pulled the next file, 2005. Another missing hiker from the northern trail, another backpack with journal, another final entry about something following through the forest, another unsolved case, and then another, 2008, 2011, 2013, 2016, 7 cases spanning 17 years. 7 hikers who had disappeared from the same general area of the park. 7 backpacks recovered with journals inside. 7 final entries that spoke of being followed by something that the hikers could hear but not see. Something that moved through the forest with an intelligence and purpose that suggested more than animal behavior. And yet, 7 cases that had been filed separately, investigated individually, with no connections drawn between them by previous investigators. No one had thought to examine the journals closely. No one had noticed the pattern. Ryan compiled all of the journals and spread them across his dining room table at home. He began reading each one in chronological order, creating a timeline not just of the disappearances, but of the behavioral patterns described in the final entries. The entity, creature, or whatever was present in the northern forest seemed to follow a predictable pattern. It would make its presence known to the hiker in the early morning hours before the hike began. It would allow the hiker to proceed with their planned trail, remaining at a distance but making its presence audible. Then, at a specific point on the trail, marked on each hiker's map in nearly identical locations, the pursuit would intensify. The journals described a moment of acceleration, where the sound of the creature moving through the forest would grow louder and closer. Several hikers had written about turning to run, about moving quickly down the trail in panic. Others had written about standing their ground, about attempting to face whatever was following them. In every single case, that was where the journal entry ended. No final words, no explanation, no indication of what had occurred in those final moments. Just blank pages that followed. Ryan became obsessed with understanding the pattern. He began spending his off days hiking the northern trail himself, staying vigilant for any signs of unusual animal activity or behavioral indicators that might explain the disappearances. He interviewed park rangers who had worked in the area during previous decades. He spoke with visitors who had completed the trail and returned safely. He reviewed weather records, trying to identify if there was any seasonal or atmospheric component to the disappearances. What he found was that the disappearances occurred irregularly, not tied to any particular season or weather pattern. They seemed almost random in their timing, separated by years at times. But the geographical location remained consistent. The same section of the northern trail, the same kilometer marker range where the trails diverged and the forest became denser and more remote. The same pattern of hikers disappearing without trace. Ryan began to experience symptoms that concerned him. He started having trouble sleeping, his mind replaying the details of the cases repeatedly. He became irritable with his colleagues. He started missing social gatherings that he had previously enjoyed. His entire world narrowed to focus exclusively on solving the mystery of the 7 missing hikers and whatever force had claimed them. One afternoon, while Ryan was alone in the ranger station filing paperwork, his supervisor approached him and asked to speak privately. The supervisor expressed concern about Ryan's mental state and his recent behavior. Colleagues had noticed that he seemed distressed. He had been asking unusual questions about archived cases. He had been spending extraordinary amounts of time researching information that seemed unrelated to his current duties. The supervisor suggested that Ryan consider taking some time off, perhaps speaking with a counselor or mental health professional. Ryan felt frustration at this suggestion. He wanted to tell his supervisor about the pattern he had discovered, about the 7 disappearances and the remarkable connections between them. But he sensed, even as the words formed in his mind, that his supervisor would not take him seriously. He would be seen as paranoid or obsessive. So Ryan agreed to take a week of vacation time, though he had no intention of resting. Instead, during that week, Ryan conducted an unauthorized expedition into the northern forest. He followed the exact route marked in each of the 7 missing hikers' trail maps. He brought equipment with him, including a high-powered flashlight, a satellite communication device, recording equipment, and a personal locator beacon. He was determined to either find evidence of what had happened to the missing hikers or to encounter whatever phenomenon had claimed them. Ryan walked the trail over 2 days, retracing the paths described in the journals. He reached the kilometer marker where, according to the journals, the creature began its pursuit. Ryan continued forward, waiting for something to occur. Hours passed. The forest remained silent, except for the normal sounds of wildlife and wind through trees. As evening approached on the second day, Ryan made camp approximately where he believed the final encounters had taken place. That night, Ryan sat alone in the darkness, recording his observations into his satellite device. He described the forest around him, the sounds he heard, the feelings he experienced. He noted the time, the temperature, the direction of the wind. He documented everything with scientific precision. He also documented his growing sense of dread and unease, the way the forest seemed to press in around him, the way his rational mind kept insisting that he was alone, even as some deeper instinct told him otherwise. What occurred during that night remained unclear, even in Ryan's own recounting. His satellite logs became fragmented. His voice recordings became incoherent. There were periods of silence lasting hours, followed by Ryan whispering observations so quietly that they were barely audible. When morning came, Ryan emerged from the forest and returned to civilization. He did not file an official report about his unauthorized expedition. He did not discuss what had happened during that night with his colleagues or supervisor. He did return to work after his vacation, but something fundamental had changed within him. He was quieter, more reserved. He no longer asked questions about the missing persons cases. When colleagues asked him directly about his expedition, he would simply state that he had experienced nothing unusual. However, Ryan did do one thing before he resigned from his position 6 months later. He carefully organized all of the journal entries from the 7 missing hikers and placed them in a secure envelope. He sealed the envelope and wrote a note on the outside stating that if anything ever happened to him, this envelope should be opened and the contents reviewed by someone in a position to investigate the Northern Trail further. He left the envelope with a trusted colleague, along with a brief verbal explanation that there was a pattern to the disappearances that he believed warranted serious investigation. To this day, the 7 missing hikers have never been found. The Northern Trail continues to be used by visitors, and the park rangers continue their patrols without awareness of what may be watching from the darker sections of forest. No official investigation has ever been launched into the pattern of disappearances or the connections between the cases that Ryan so meticulously documented. The envelope containing the journals remains in the possession of Ryan's former colleague, though it has never been opened or acted upon. The Park Service maintains its official position that the disappearances are unrelated incidents, isolated tragedies that unfortunately occur when individuals venture into remote wilderness areas. And Ryan, who left his position in the Park Service and moved to a different state, has never returned to the forest. He does not discuss what he experienced during that night in the woods. He does not offer theories about what happened. He remains silent, as if rendered incapable of explaining what he had learned in that dark forest, where civilization ends and something else entirely begins. Lucy had always believed that the woods were, in the end, a place governed by natural order. Predator and prey, the cyclical decay and rebirth that shaped every tree, every blade of grass, every fleeting animal in her park. She did not consider herself superstitious. Her childhood had been shaped by reason, the discipline of her scientist parents, long afternoons in the back of lecture halls with her homework as complicated hypotheses were explained overhead. As a ranger, she liked that sense of structure. The patrol logs, the checklists, the regular sweep of familiar trails. Strange rumors flickered among her colleagues, of course. Ghostly figures in storm-soaked cabins, shadowy shapes pacing the tree line at dusk. A voice whispered down the two-way radio that never announced its name. Lucy honored these stories with a polite nod, a half smile, and a change of topic. She was assigned to the Eastern Ridge that autumn, a remote arc of land heavy with pine and a persistent, resinous mist. Assignments had come in late that Thursday, when the first snows lay in packets beneath the trees, but the air itself stayed unseasonably warm. Lucy's shift began at dawn. She locked the station, unfolded her map, tucked her phone into the sleeve pocket of her jacket, and started toward a series of switchbacks that brought her above the fog line. The ridge was empty. The only company in those hours, the crows, their silhouettes sharp against the gray, and her own steady breath. It was only when she rounded a hairpin bend, the sun just splitting the valley in pale light, that Lucy noticed the footprints. Clear, distinct, and recent, printed in the powder-dusted soil along the edge of the path. Another ranger must have come this way before her. She paused, checked her watch, glanced back at the map. No other shift had been assigned her sector. Still, the print was unmistakably Park Service. The tread, the size, the narrow curve at the heel prescribed by standard-issue boots. She continued, her curiosity sharpening. Half a mile ahead, Lucy saw a man on the path. Broad-shouldered, wearing the deep olive jacket, the pale-brimmed hat, even the rectangular Park Service badge clipped to his chest. He faced away, and for a moment she felt relief at having unspoken company in these lonely woods. When she called out a greeting, the man's posture stiffened, but he did not turn. Instead, he stepped to the side, let her pass, and nodded, his gaze fixed on the shadowy tangle of spruce beside the trail. She tried to speak, to exchange the small talk that usually passed between colleagues, but her words died as a chill swept over her. She registered something odd about him. The jacket seemed too worn for a current ranger, almost threadbare, and his badge was strangely dull, as if it had been handled for years longer than any she had seen. The letters were the style of a generation before, a serif font, not the blocky print now in use. Lucy marched on. She descended into a creek basin and radioed in, the static loud between her notes. Eastern Ridge, Lucy. Met up with another on the same assignment. Badge number unclear. Confirm, please. The reply from dispatch was brisk. Lucy, there is no one else logged for your sector. Confirm location. Did you see a visitor? Lucy replied, but dispatch simply repeated that she was alone. She wondered if a maintenance crew member had been reassigned without her knowledge, or if a supervisor had decided to do a spot check. The rest of her loop passed uneventfully, though she could not shake the feeling that she was being observed. The forest felt thicker, denser, like a pressure in the air built behind her back. Every so often, she would glimpse movement along her periphery, a glimmer of tan fabric or the suggestion of a broad hat. But when she turned, there was nothing. The wind died, and a rare sense of being unwelcome prickled up her skin. By noon, she returned to the trailhead, her shift finished, and entered the ranger station to log her patrol. The headquarters was as silent as she had left it. She scribbled her notes in the binder and set her radio down. Before leaving, she checked the security monitor, a habit she had developed after a string of minor vandalism cases the summer prior. The low-res feed flickered. On the screen, Lucy saw herself entering alone, her movements brisk and self-contained. But in the corner of the frame, there was a shadow, the edge of another figure caught between two slats of blinds, hat brim low, jacket indistinct. She rewound. Again, she entered solo. The shadow followed, its movements subtle, as though the camera barely registered its presence. A cold unease bloomed in her chest. Lucy double-checked the station records for any badge or log entry that might explain the man she had seen. Nothing matched. The next day, Lucy approached her supervisor, punctuating every word with the precision of someone trained to weigh evidence carefully. "I need to file a report," she started. "There was a man on my patrol route, ranger uniform, not in the roster, security camera captured something strange. The supervisor arched an eyebrow. "Are you sure you are not overtired? Not a volunteer or off-duty staff? We have confirmation you were scheduled solo." Lucy pushed the footage across the desk. The supervisor watched, silent for a moment, then nodded, saying only, "Probably a visitor caught by the cameras at the wrong angle." Case closed. That night, Lucy slept poorly. She dreamed of mist rolling down the ridge, of footsteps that echo in places where sound should not carry. When she woke, she found muddy prints across the welcome mat inside her apartment. She did not remember tracking in any mud. 2 days later, she returned to the same ridge for her scheduled patrol. The path was deserted again, but the sensation of pressure, of a presence just beyond sight, was stronger than before. At a fork in the trail, she examined the dust. For more prints, there were none. The woods were quieter than usual. Even the crows seemed to have abandoned the ridge. Lucy walked faster, heart pounding, glancing over her shoulder every few minutes. Midway through the loop, her radio came to life, the static warbling. The voice that spoke was rough but familiar, a clipped cadence she had not heard on park radio before. "You are off your route, Lucy." She froze. Who is this? The transmission was followed by a low laugh, then silence. She tried to call it in, but there was only a return of static, no response from dispatch. She sped up, nerves jangling, carefully observing her surroundings. At a sharp turn, she caught sight of a figure standing in the shade among the trees. Hat low, jacket sleeves long, every detail aligned with the man she had seen 2 days before. He did not move or call out. His hands hung at his sides, unmoving and oddly rigid. Even from a distance, Lucy could see that his face was both familiar and wrong. A waxy, unnatural pallor, eyes lacking all light. Lucy forced herself to maintain composure, continuing rigidly past without breaking into a run. Behind her, the forest seemed to swallow all sound. She did not see him again, but the sense of being watched never left her. At the station, Lucy checked the logs. A list of all official badges, uniforms, staff. There were several names she recognized, and one she did not. A slip of yellowed paper was pasted into a folder at the back. Harrison R., deceased 1978, retired badge, uniform returned. Deceased, yet assigned to that very sector as primary ranger over 40 years ago. Lucy hesitated before speaking with a senior ranger. Have you ever felt you are not alone on a patrol, even if the logs say otherwise? The older woman nodded in a way that suggested she understood more than she would admit aloud. Some parts of the park, you do your job and keep your questions to yourself, the senior ranger responded. We do not talk about the ridge anymore, not since the accident. Sometimes you see a ranger who is not really there. He is not supposed to be here, but neither are we. And the balance holds as long as no one tries to find out more. The next days, Lucy found her sleep fitful, her heart responding to any unusual sound in the night. Reports from hikers trickled in, always the same. A man in uniform, never quite close enough to recognize, silently watching. Some described being lost, only to have the stranger guide them back to the path without a word. Others spoke of inexplicable chills, of voices calling their name, always from the deeper trees. Then, after a week with no further incidents, Lucy received a call at home from a blocked number. The voice at the other end was hollow. "Return the badge," it said, unblinking, and then hung up. Lucy spent hours searching her belongings, but she never found any misplaced ranger badge. A month passed before Lucy dared return to the ridge. Official duties called her elsewhere, and she was privately grateful for the change. But stories continued. Rangers exchanged uneasy glances at meetings. A new hire, assigned to the Eastern Ridge, came back shaken after an encounter she would not describe. One evening, a power outage left the station unlit. Lucy, charged with locking up the records, noticed that the folder with the name Harrison R. was missing from its shelf. In its place was a folded, decades-old park bulletin. Inscribed at the bottom was an unfamiliar hand. "The woods remember. We do too." Lucy requested a transfer after that. When the paperwork went through, she left behind her badge, her uniform, and the station keys on her supervisor's desk. On her drive out of the park for the last time, she saw in the rearview mirror a figure at the edge of the parking lot. Broad-shouldered, hat low, jacket catching the light in a way she recognized. He raised a hand in what could have been a wave or a warning, then faded into the dusk. Her former colleagues sometimes spoke of her afterward. Lucy was a model ranger, one of them would say. She did everything by the book, until she saw something the book did not cover. That winter, the Eastern Ridge closed temporarily due to storm damage. The patrols were reassigned and the logs kept with even greater care. But those who entered the woods with histories older than their memories knew that somewhere, just out of sight, walked a ranger who never stepped off his route, who watched over the living and the lost, who would forever hold the title of the one who was not there. Lucy did not visit the park again. She kept her distance, building a life away from the forests that had once felt so rational. At times, on nights when mist gathered along the road outside her window, she would hear the low crackle of a radio, or the faint, measured tread of boots on gravel. She would wake and find nothing there, but she would never quite lose the feeling that someone was, somewhere, keeping her in sight, ensuring the balance remained. She never spoke of those final months with friends or family. When asked why she left the service, she would say only that some mysteries in the forest are not meant to be solved. And if, on certain fog-bound mornings, the old park radio she kept as a memento sprang to life with static and a clipped, unfamiliar voice, she would listen in silence, heart steady, until the transmission fell quiet once more. Christopher had worked in the Park Service for 12 years, and in all that time, he had learned one essential truth. The mountains kept their secrets. He had hiked every trail mapped within his jurisdiction, had spent countless nights in remote stations, had witnessed the slow turning of seasons on slopes where civilization felt like a distant rumor. Yet he remained humble before the forest. He did not presume to understand everything that moved within it, everything that waited in the shadows between the trees. There were mysteries that could not be explained by science alone, phenomena that existed in the gray spaces between rational understanding and acknowledged impossibility. The evening Christopher encountered the fog began ordinarily enough. He was conducting a routine patrol of the Canyon Trail, a pathway that descended into a narrow gorge where the forest grew so dense that daylight barely penetrated to the canyon floor. His shift was set to end at dusk. He had perhaps 30 minutes remaining when the fog began to roll in from the north, thickening with an unusual speed that Christopher noted but did not alarm him. Mountain weather was unpredictable. Fog was not uncommon in this region, especially during the transition between seasons. What was unusual was the quality of the fog itself. It did not rise from the ground as ground-level mist typically would. Instead, it descended, flowing down the canyon walls like water, pooling in the lower sections and creeping upward with an almost deliberate intention. Within minutes, Christopher could not see more than 10 feet ahead of him. He turned on his flashlight, but the beams seemed to be absorbed by the fog rather than cut through it. creating a soft halo around him that did nothing to illuminate the path ahead. The fog had a density, a weight, that made breathing feel slightly more difficult than usual. Christopher decided to turn back. He knew this trail well enough to navigate it half-blind, but there was no purpose in continuing when visibility was compromised. He turned and began walking back toward the trailhead, moving carefully over the rocky terrain. That was when he heard the voice. It came from deeper in the canyon, from the direction he had just abandoned. The voice was distant and thin, carrying an edge of desperation that cut through the muffling effect of the fog. It was calling his name. Christopher stopped immediately. He knew that it was his name, not some coincidence or mishearing of wind through trees. The voice was calling clearly and distinctly. "Christopher, Christopher, help me. Christopher, where are you?" The words were formed with precision, shaped by a human voice unmistakably intentional. His first instinct was to answer. His second was to question how anyone in the canyon would know his name. Visitors did not typically have access to ranger schedules. His name was not visible on his uniform in a way that would be readable at distance. Christopher stood very still, listening intently. The voice came again, clearer now, tinged with what sounded like genuine anguish and physical pain. "Christopher, I need you. Please help me. There is something wrong. I cannot find the trail. I am lost down here." Christopher began walking back into the canyon, toward the voice. His rational mind was generating explanations. A hiker in distress who had somehow obtained his name from the station information booth. Another ranger who had been reassigned to his area without his knowledge. A visitor who had overheard his name mentioned by someone else. These explanations seemed plausible enough that he justified continuing forward, his flashlight held before him like a shield against the fog and the unknown. The canyon became narrower as he descended. The walls seemed to press closer on either side, the stone surfaces becoming more jagged and treacherous. The fog thickened further, so completely now that Christopher could see neither the ground beneath his feet nor the sky above. He relied entirely on the memory of the trail's path, counting his steps, trying to maintain orientation. The voice, however, remained clear and constant. It had become more frantic now, the tone shifting from plea to urgency to what sounded like raw panic. "Christopher, do not stop. Keep moving. I am just ahead, just a little further. You have to help me. I cannot breathe. Something is wrong. I am hurt. My leg is broken. Help me, please." Christopher pressed forward, determination overriding caution. He called out, identifying himself, asking the voice to identify itself in return. There was only the sound of his own echo, strange and distorted in the fog, bouncing off canyon walls in directions that seemed impossible. The voice did not respond to his questions or attempts at dialogue. It simply continued its litany. "Christopher, Christopher, Christopher, help me. I am dying. I cannot breathe. The pain is unbearable. Please come find me." The ground beneath Christopher's feet shifted. He had been climbing without realizing it, moving upward along the canyon wall on a pathway he did not remember existing. The fog pressed against him now, so thick that it felt almost solid, almost sentient. He turned his flashlight in all directions, sweeping the beam through empty gray. But there was nothing but the endless, undifferentiated fog. Everything looked identical in all directions. He tried to turn back, to retrace his steps, but the fog had erased any path he had taken. It was as though the canyon itself was shifting around him, rearranging its configuration. That was when a figure appeared in the fog. It emerged gradually, solidifying out of the gray like an image developing in old photographs or memories becoming concrete. It was a man wearing a ranger uniform, a uniform that seemed older, more worn than modern versions. The ranger was moving toward Christopher with an expression of absolute terror etched across his face. The ranger was gasping for breath, clutching at his chest, eyes wide with a fear that transcended anything Christopher had ever witnessed in his 12 years of service. Without saying a word, the other ranger reached out toward Christopher, and then he spoke, his voice suddenly overlaying and drowning out the voice that had been calling through the fog. "Do not answer," the ranger whispered urgently, his words directed at Christopher with desperate intensity. "Do not listen. Do not look. It mimics people. It learns voices and names. It pretends to need help. It has been doing this for decades, centuries perhaps. It draws people deeper into the canyon where it can take them." I ignored the warnings. I answered the voice. I kept going deeper. I thought I was helping someone, but there was no one. There never is. Do not make my mistake. Do not answer. Do not look. Turn back now while you still can escape. Before Christopher could respond or ask the ranger to clarify these cryptic warnings, the man's body convulsed violently. His back arched backward at an angle that seemed anatomically impossible, bones cracking audibly with sickening force. His head twisted completely around on his neck, his chin nearly touching his shoulder blade. A sound emerged from him, not a scream exactly, but something far worse. A wet, strangled gasp, as if his lungs were trying to expel something other than air. His eyes, which had been wide with terror, now fixed on Christopher with the glassy, unseeing gaze of death. The ranger collapsed. His body fell at an unnatural angle to the rocky ground, limbs splayed in a configuration that spoke of violence and trauma beyond comprehension. Christopher stepped back, horror flooding through every part of his consciousness. He moved toward the fallen ranger, reaching down to check for a pulse, any sign of life remaining. There was nothing. The body was still warm, but all consciousness, all animation, had fled. Christopher scrambled backward, his mind reeling, his carefully maintained composure shattering. He grabbed his radio and attempted to call dispatch, but there was only static. His flashlight flickered and then died, the battery seemingly drained beyond recovery. He stood in the absolute blackness of the fog, alone with the corpse of the ranger who had warned him. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Christopher controlled his breathing through sheer force of will, forced himself to remain calm enough to move. He began walking carefully in what he hoped was the direction of the trailhead. The fog was beginning to lift, slowly. Through it, he could see shadows now, the vague outlines of trees. The voice had stopped calling. It took Christopher nearly 40 minutes to find his way back to the trailhead. When he arrived at the ranger station, he was shaking so severely that he could barely grip the telephone to call for emergency services. He reported the body in the canyon, provided as much detail as he could remember about the location and circumstances. Then he sat down and waited. The search and rescue team arrived within an hour. Christopher led them back into the canyon, retracing his steps as best he could remember. They searched for more than 3 hours. They found no body. There was no evidence that anyone had died there. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, nothing. The search commander approached Christopher with concern evident on his weathered face. He suggested gently that perhaps Christopher had experienced some sort of episode in the fog. Perhaps a hallucination brought on by stress or lack of sleep. He recommended that Christopher take some time off and speak with a mental health professional. Christopher insisted that he had seen what he had seen, He described the ranger in precise detail: the uniform, the patch on his shoulder, the exact words that had been spoken. The search commander listened patiently and then asked Christopher to identify the ranger by name from personnel records. Christopher looked through the photographs but could not find the man he had seen in the fog. There was no record of any ranger matching that description currently employed. Over the next few days, Christopher found himself haunted by the encounter. He began researching the history of the park, pulling old personnel files, newspaper archives, historical documents. He discovered that 43 years earlier, a ranger named Samuel had gone missing from the canyon trail. Samuel had been conducting a routine patrol when he disappeared. His body was never recovered. A massive search effort yielded no results. Samuel was simply gone. There were also references to other incidents, other rangers who had gone missing over the decades, all in connection with the canyon. Christopher saw the pattern now, the recurring tragedy that the Park Service had never properly investigated or acknowledged. Christopher submitted his resignation 1 week later. He did not provide a specific reason beyond citing personal reasons. He left the park and moved to a different state, taking a position at a university where he would never again have to enter a canyon shrouded in fog. Years later, he would sometimes wonder if the fog still rolled down the canyon walls on certain evenings, and if the voice still called out names, still lured people deeper into darkness. Penelope Butler would always remember the moment the pounding on her cabin door changed from an inconvenience to a harbinger. For years, she had worked the western stretch of the park, thick with firs, cold brooks coiled with mist, and the sloping hush that always seemed to walk a careful line between serene and silencing. She took pride in her readiness, her methodical approach to emergencies, her practiced calm under pressure. But by the end of that night, nothing she had learned in ranger training would quite fit the events she was about to face. It was just after 9 o'clock when the first frantic burst of fists rattled her door, urgent, uneven, accompanied by panicked voices. Penelope left her tea untouched and answered with no hesitation. 2 women stood outside, one clutching her arm, blood seeping slick and thick between her fingers. The other's face was gray, trembling, full of tears that made her mascara pool beneath her eyes. The injured woman's shirt was torn, revealing a bite mark on her shoulder that Penelope would never forget. Deep, crescent-shaped, unmistakably human in pattern. They said it was a man, naked, ran out of the brush, tackled her. The uninjured woman recited, as if she needed to say it to make it real. "Please help us. He bit her. He tried to drag her away. We screamed and he vanished." Penelope ushered them inside and called dispatch, relaying the emergency with professional clarity as her mind worked through all the possibilities. A disturbed camper, a fugitive, some drug-fueled rampage. She washed the bite, bandaged it, and forced herself not to flinch at the sight of the wound. Too precise for an animal, too intentional for a wild beast. The backup arrived in the form of Nathan Simmons, a senior ranger whose calm was matched only by the gravity in his voice. Together, they took down the women's statements and launched into the night, searching the area near the women's campsite. The incident had occurred near the creek, a place known for its dense brush and the shadowed forms of rocks just beneath the water's surface. They scoured with flashlights and shouted warnings, ranger protocol for dangerous suspects. Penelope felt the raw exposure of the dark forest in her bones, and the way silence always followed their shouts. They found nothing but torn branches, 2 sets of hasty footprints, a 3rd set, bare feet centered in the mud by the creek. No shoe prints, no clothes, no sign of possessions. Not a word in the darkness. Just crickets punctuated by the pulse of Penelope's heart. After an hour, they called the search. Penelope's dread only deepened when they returned to the ranger station and found no news of an escaped patient or wild man matching the description. As dawn pressed weakly against the cabin, the air felt colder than before, thick with the unease that settles in when rules of order fall apart. The following day brought news of another sighting. A family of hikers on a trail a mile away from the creek reported seeing a man crouched in the brush, body streaked with mud, eyes wide and shining even in low light. When approached, he ran off, running not towards the safety of trails or roads, but deeper into the wildest, most tangled part of the forest. With another ranger, Penelope organized a search grid, and together they covered the undergrowth, calling out, waiting, always prepared for another cry for help. Yet again, there was nothing. No man, no more tracks. That night, as Penelope lay awake, images of the wound returned to her mind. The human impression of the bite, the distance between the teeth, the frightening deliberateness of it. The next morning, she and Nathan reviewed ranger duty logs for the previous 48 hours. Only a few rangers had been scheduled near the site. All accounted for, all present, all denying anything unusual had happened on their respective patrols. Restlessness took root. Penelope dug back into old files by instinct, trawling through past incident reports. Within 5 years, 2 similar attacks had been recorded. Each time, the wounds were human. The victims described a wild-eyed man with strange strength, always vanishing, never caught. The pattern was there, like an echo that never faded into real silence, always lurking beneath more mundane explanations. Word spread among the rangers quietly, like a rumor best not spoken aloud. Some thought it was a derelict lost in the woods, surviving on wild berries and the hunt. Others whispered about previous disappearances in that sector, rangers whose gear turned up, boots left by the water, but whose bodies were never found. Penelope questioned more veterans and older volunteers. She heard stories she had never been told before. Sometimes campers had returned from the deeper woods, dappled in bruises or smelling of earth and decay. Sometimes people vanished, only to have their clothing found weeks later in odd, ritualistic heaps. Nathan, persistent and methodical, uncovered a news clipping from over a decade ago. It described a ranger who had suffered a breakdown, walked into the woods late one evening after his last shift, and was never seen again. The locals had whispered about a feral ranger, surviving off the land, blending into the underbrush as easily as any deer or coyote. But records were thin. No photographs survived. All that remained of his identity was a single, faded uniform badge, found stuck high in a tree long after. Then, 3 nights later, another incident. A solo backpacker stumbled into the ranger station at dawn. He had been chased for miles by a howling naked man covered in blood who stalked him, staying just beyond the firelight in relentless silence. He showed Penelope scratches across his torso and a half-healed bite mark on his arm. Again, human, unmistakable. Penelope could not dismiss the strange consistency in each account. How the stories varied only in trivial detail, but not in substance. Some deeper horror lay in the woods, the certainty that civilized order could unravel in a single instant of violence. Worse, what if it was someone who had once shared their duty, uniform, and oath? She pressed for a psychological evaluation of the most recent victim, determined to discover if hysteria or hallucination played a part, though the physical evidence always said otherwise. The growing tension among rangers became palpable. None wanted to admit there might be something fundamentally wrong in the soil, the water, or history itself. One of the oldest rangers, gray-bearded and known for his stories, told Penelope as they walked their beat, "Sometimes the woods claim a person, keep them for a while, and return what is left. Most of the time, the thing that comes back that does not belong to any world we understand. Best to leave it alone, and hope it leaves you alone. That night, Penelope dreamed of losing her own way, wandering off trail, feeling teeth break her skin, the hatred of old hunger kindling in the eyes of someone human, but long since lost to the wilderness. She awoke sweating, the echo of a scream on her tongue. Days passed. No fresh attacks, but a mounting sense that something waited. The regular sounds of the forest grew stilted. Birdsong thinned at dawn and fell silent in the evening. Even seasoned hikers felt it, remarking on a subtle but inescapable wrongness. One evening, Penelope and Nathan received an anonymous phone tip. The caller whispered, "He is not gone. He is in the old quarry, watching at dusk." Nathan, who had lost patience for legend, insisted they pursue it. They approached the quarry cautiously, flashlights and radios ready, every sense straining for movement. There, among abandoned machinery, was a solitary figure. Skin yellowed, ribs sharp, face half covered by a beard matted with dirt. He wore a remnant of a park ranger's uniform, torn and stained, badge still faintly visible. He crouched in the moonlight, rocking on his haunches, humming an old lullaby. His eyes followed Penelope and Nathan, but the recognition was not human. When Penelope commanded him to stop and identify himself, he only tilted his head. Nathan tried to approach, but the man bared his teeth, feral, jagged and missing several, and bolted into the undergrowth, impossibly fast. They pursued for a while, but realized quickly he had disappeared too deftly into the shadows. Nathan radioed for help, and the team scoured the area for hours, coming up with nothing but the lonely echo of their own voices. Another incident report would be filed, another incident to be buried in paperwork, but nothing substantial gained. Yet Penelope found herself recalling the stories told by the older rangers, the ones about how the woods sometimes borrowed a soul and returned something else. After that night, the attacks ceased. Reports of the naked man faded into rumor again. The strange chills and unexplained noises along old trails became, once more, stories only told at shift change or over coffee at dawn. Penelope tried to move on, burying herself in daily routine, hiding her nightmares behind a mask of professionalism. A month later, the woman who had suffered the first bite returned to thank Penelope in person and brought with her a set of medical records. The doctor had declared the wound healing well, though oddly, the bite had not become infected as expected. Tissue samples were inconclusive. They did not match any animal or registered human DNA. Penelope sent the information to a private investigator she trusted. Weeks passed with no reply. Then, posted to her office one morning, she received a nondescript envelope, inside which was a single note. "You seek answers where the woods keep their own counsel. What you found was not lost. It was sent back." She spent long nights sitting by the cabin window, watching the shadows gather at the tree line. She could not shake the feeling that, for as long as people built a home at the margin of the wilderness, the forest might sometimes borrow a face, an appetite, or a memory. Perhaps, she mused on the darkest nights, it was simply the cost of sharing the world with something much older and far more patient than humans could ever be. Penelope never did see the feral ranger again, but sometimes, as mist rose off the creek at midnight, she imagined she saw a figure moving through the brush, always on the edges, never quite near, its eyes shining like memories that belonged to the wild. Stella Kelly had seen her share of loss during her years as a ranger. She witnessed heartbreak woven through the wilderness, children separated from parents, hikers claimed by hidden drop-offs, life suddenly undone by the shuffle and shift of nature's indifference. Yet long after the grief faded from those tragedies, it was the stories that remained, the ones that sifted through the cracks of daily duties and re-emerged on cold, sleepless nights. Of all these tales, none stayed with her like the legend of the drowned child. The lake where Stella worked boasted a haunted reputation among veteran rangers. Occasionally, she heard the story told on stormy nights, passed from old hands to new hires, as a cautionary tale meant to provoke caution or perhaps just a shudder. As the story went, a ranger decades ago had failed to investigate a child's cries near the shore. The following morning, that ranger discovered the body of a young girl washed up amid the reeds, pale and silent. The guilt overtook him, so much that he haunted the shoreline, waiting for another chance to set things right. Some said that the ghost of the child would return, seeking not rescue but vengeance or recognition. Others whispered that anyone who ignored the cries would be cursed, always returning in their dreams to the cold, endless water. For Stella, such things were fiction, little more than elaborate ways to fill long shifts after dark, until the day she heard the voice herself. It was early spring. The air clung wet and gray to the land, and the foot traffic had yet to spike with the arrival of campers. Stella patrolled the perimeter as the fog rolled low, her boots making shallow prints in the mud. The radio chirped with routine check-ins until late afternoon, when static merged with a single, high-pitched sound, as thin and sharp as a whistle. Stella paused and listened. The sound was unmistakable. A child crying for help, the voice carried not by wind, but rising eerily straight from the lake. She told herself it must be a bird or a playful shriek from across the water. Yet the cry persisted, rising and falling so convincingly that her chest tightened in response. Still, she hesitated, not out of cruelty, but because the voice was so incongruous, so unsuited to the lonely lakeshore at dusk. She decided not to investigate, certain that some trick of wind or memory played with her senses. Morning revealed a silence more profound than usual. Long rays cut through the mist, and Stella took her usual walk along the south bank. There, tangled in weeds and silt, she found what looked like a small, pale bundle. Heart pounding, she rushed forward and pulled the body onto the sand. It was a child, a girl, limp and sodden in an old-fashioned dress, features alight with a strange sort of peace. Stella called for help, her voice cracking as she began CPR. The child's eyes flickered open. For a moment, hope flared in Stella's heart. But the eyes staring back at her did not blink, did not move, nor did the chest rise for air. The face curled into a thin, glassy smile. By the time backup arrived, Stella had covered the body with her jacket, unable to explain what she had seen. The incident drew only passing notice from the authorities. The body, though small and newly drowned, did not match any recent missing persons reports. Locals whispered about it for a week or two, then their lives moved on, as lives do. But the memory sat heavy in Stella's mind, nagging like a poorly healed wound. A week passed. Stella returned to duty, haunted by unease. Late one evening, two older rangers, both close to retirement, came to find her as she finished her shift. They asked her if she had heard anything strange at the lake before finding the girl. When she told them about the cries and her hesitation to check, the two men exchanged grim glances. They explained quietly that this had happened before. The same child, the same drowned form, had appeared over the decades, always following a night when a ranger or passerby ignored the cries from the water. The girl was known by name among those who had worked the region longest, her disappearance the subject of small-town legend. a search had been conducted in the 1970s, with efforts fruitlessly combing the woods, dragging the lake, but nothing had been found. Yet the story resurfaced every few years, like a whispered warning waiting for new ears. Stella began to feel watched while on duty near the lake. When night came, she heard laughter where there should have been only the calls of frogs. Shadows gathered along the surface, and ripples cut the water where no boat or breeze had passed. Sometimes she glimpsed small footprints in dew, leading up from the water's edge and vanishing abruptly, as if a child had wandered out and simply faded into mist. Intrigued and unnerved, Stella requested access to old case files. She uncovered yellowed newspaper clippings, not only about the original girl, but other disappearances. The names changed, but the basic facts repeated. Each a child last seen wandering near the lake, each body discovered after nights when the cries were dismissed or doubted. It was as if the lake required a toll of neglect, answering silence with tragedy. Her dreams became turbulent. Stella saw the child, sometimes trying to call her back, sometimes being dragged downward by invisible hands within the water. She visited the local library on her off days, hoping to uncover anything that might break the cycle. She came across a reference to an old superstition. If you return the lost to water and speak their name aloud, a curse may lift, but only if your heart is free from guilt. One dawn, after a particularly unsettled sleep, Stella awoke to the sound of crying, this time nearer, originating beside her cabin, as if someone stood on the porch. She rushed outside, flashlight in hand. There were wet footprints on the steps. They stopped at her door and nowhere else. Her throat tightened in fear, but nothing was there. That night, she reached out to the two older rangers, seeking some kind of explanation or ritual to end the haunting. They met her by the shore after midnight, the water black as obsidian, the moon hidden behind a curtain of clouds. "You cannot save what is already gone," one ranger told her, "but you can witness. Let the lake have what it wants. A name remembered, a story told. That is all you can give." Following this advice, Stella returned to the water's edge that night and spoke aloud the name of the lost girl. She recounted her entire story, the fear, the guilt, how she had wanted to help but hesitated. The air was still as she spoke, the dark waters holding her words as if drinking them. As dawn approached, the fog lifted gently, and for the first time in weeks, the lake seemed at peace. There were no cries through the mist, no shadows on the water, only the patient hush of nature restored to its silence. For the first time since the incident, Stella slept deeply, with no dreams. But the sense of reprieve did not last. Several months later, a young intern stationed on the opposite side of the lake heard sobbing as twilight fell, and like Stella, dismissed it. The next morning, the routine returned. The echo, the discovery, the ritual. The cycle, it seemed, could not be wholly broken, only mollified for a time. Stella continued her career, always attentive now to the edges of her senses, always wary near water. She never, ever ignored an unexplained cry. She taught new rangers to be vigilant for more than just animal dangers or lost hikers. She recounted the legend to those willing to listen, knowing that dismissing folklore could sometimes cost more than anyone was willing to pay. Once, years later, a child went missing in another section of forest. On a night when storms lashed the lake and wind howled through the trees. Rangers gathered to search, and Stella joined, heart heavy. Through the rain, she heard her name called softly from the reeds. A child's voice, sweet and terribly knowing. She led her team to the spot, and together they found the girl, lost but alive, curled between two roots, blue with cold but breathing. No one could explain what drew Stella to that exact point. She never told anyone about the guiding voice that had lifted her from sleep to the water's edge. Sometimes, at dusk, Stella swore she saw a figure standing in the shallows, weightless as mist, wearing an old-fashioned dress. The figure never approached or spoke, but its presence was not threatening. It seemed more like a guardian, maintaining a careful vigil, ensuring that memory would not contract into shadow. Over time, the occurrences lessened. Perhaps, Stella thought, the lake's dead do not desire vengeance as much as recognition. Even trauma dims when shared. She spent nearly 2 decades at the lake, each year a testament to quiet vigilance and the price of even unintentional neglect. The legend of the drowned child remained, passed from ranger to ranger in the slow, cyclical march of time, an uneasy truce between the living and the lost. Stella came to believe that the truest horror lay not in confronting something supernatural, but in realizing how easy it was for everyday inaction to breed tragedy, how silence granted legend and loss alike their power. She never heard the cries again, but she looked and she listened. And long after Stella left for a new life, new rangers still heard the stories. Some heard the voice and ignored it. Others followed it to find nothing but mist and goose flesh. But for those who listened and remembered, the lake remained a place both haunted and hallowed. A testament to the fact that some spirits will only rest when their story is told aloud, again and again, for those who dare to listen. Christian Hayes had long ago learned that working in dispatch was as vital as being out on the trails. His years of patrolling remote corners of the park had gifted him a sixth sense for trouble, a subtle tightening in his gut, a switch that flipped inside him when something bigger than just a lost hiker or downed tree was lurking on the daily roster. But all his experience had not prepared him for the case of the burned-out vehicle and the secrets it would pull from the shadows. It started with a routine drive along old service roads that twisted through the wildest, steepest draws crisscrossing the south boundary. Christian was assigned to audit signage and repair a washout reported the week before. By mid-morning, his checklist was mostly done. But as he rounded a sharp curve, something caught his eye in the undergrowth below. A flash of faded paint, a metallic glint nearly hidden by thicket and bramble. He killed the engine and reached for his field glasses. What he saw froze him. A car, long abandoned, wedged against rocks at the bottom of a steep ravine. The roof had caved. The side panels were scorched black. Years of grim discovery had made Christian efficient. He radioed the find to base, marked the GPS, and after a tricky scramble, descended into the ravine. The undergrowth was thick, and the smell hit him first. A burnt chemical sweetness lingering more than dust and moss. He moved around to the trunk, instinctively keeping his lines of escape open. Inside, beneath warped steel, were bones. Small, almost certainly human. Charred yet still arranged in the shape of a seated woman. 2 smaller forms slumped beside her. He felt the familiar detachment settle in. Not for the first time, he wondered what it meant for so many tragedies to be unearthed in places meant for peace. Within hours, the area was thick with responding units. Officials from the sheriff's office, state law enforcement, park brass, forensics, each marking evidence, taking photos, swapping cases. Christian gave his statement and stood back, knowing the rhythm. A found body means old wounds splitting open. The vehicle's registration number was corroded, yet by mid-afternoon, authorities confirmed the link. 3 people, a woman and 2 children, reported missing nearly 5 months before. Their case had featured in local news, billboards, desperate pleas. Now, Christian was told there was at least the first grim answer to what had become of them. Yet for Christian, the answer did not answer enough. The case, he learned, was hauntingly similar to others he had encountered. A quick review of case files, with help from a detective who had once been a ranger himself, revealed 3 previous disappearances from the same sector, all linked to burned-out cars hidden or crashed in remote terrain. The details repeated themselves. Families or lone travelers missing for months, vehicles unrecovered despite massive searches, then suddenly surfacing years or decades later, almost always discovered by park personnel. The official explanations: mechanical failure, tragic accident, domestic crisis, rarely satisfied the gnawing sense of unfinished business. Staring at the car, Christian cataloged every incongruous detail. The scorch marks were strange, patterns inconsistent with simple fire, as if the burn had happened in controlled bursts rather than in one panicked inferno. The passenger door awaited only the faintest tug to swing open, but the interior appeared to have been aggressively cleaned, wiped of fingerprints, yet blackened all the same, as if time and human cunning had conspired together. One of the car seats in the back was missing its belt, as though someone had painstakingly cut it out after the fire. In the days that followed, Christian was granted access to help sift through evidence. A perk for being the initial finder, but also for his reputation as a meticulous eye. He spent evenings in the station's archive, looking not only at files, but at the photographs tied bleakly to each cold case. Every image told a story of interruption, a road trip detoured, a picnic abandoned, a life snipped at its bright arc. The similarities were so numerous that when Christian overlaid old and new maps, he found that all 4 vehicles were discovered within a span of less than 7 miles. As if something at the heart of the woods selected these places with a cruel intelligence. He pressed into the anomaly, drawing late hours and uneasy glances from co-workers. When Christian asked to see records from before his employment, a retired ranger obliged him. A yellow folder stained with coffee, its tab labeled "Found Unsolved." At the top was a newspaper clipping from 1967. A mother and son gone missing, burnt-out sedan unearthed years later by a ranger, charred beyond positive identification, but suggestive in tragic outline. But the sedan's make and serial number indicated it could not have existed in 1967. The earliest the model appeared was 1974. Somewhere across the years, 2 truths had crossed wires, and now nothing fit comfortably together. One evening, as a storm lashed at the cabin roof, Christian pored over satellite images, comparing tree cover and road patterns through half a century. He circled a low, looping bend of trail that appeared, then vanished, then returned in every decade's survey. The campfire rumor among old rangers was that the ground itself seemed to change. Once a logging access, later removed, rebuilt for a search and rescue operation, returned again as a utility corridor. Every mapmaker seemed to erase and redraw the road as if the land itself was restless. Christian decided to walk the zone in person. He hiked midday beneath a sky still gunmetal from the night storm. Hours passed as he moved through thicket and slope, following the path of all 4 car discoveries. What unsettled him most was the absence of wildlife. The forest here felt neither thriving nor dead, but simply wrong. Its quiet not of peace, but of uneasy expectation. He found 3 stone piles, irregular mounds the size of large dogs, scattered with corners of old cloth, melted plastic, and other debris. Once, shoulder brushing a sapling near a pile, he found a divergent track, faded tire grooves leading nowhere. At the furthest pile, Christian found the oldest evidence, a metal tag hidden beneath gravel. He picked it up with gloved hands. Cleaned, it revealed a name and date. A park maintenance worker who had supposedly died in a landslide in 1968. Yet here his tag was, yards from the ravine where the oldest missing vehicle lay. The forensics lead confirmed the name matched maintenance records. But no one could explain how the tag had traveled into the future, as if a hand had carried it forward in time. Christian's dreams became restless. Flashes of firelight, screams arcing skyward and swallowed by dark trees, headlights flickering in fog. He awoke to realize he had begun to dread the drive past that sector. The ravine seemed to leer at him, daring him to unearth what everyone else left buried. A month later, another body surfaced. This time not through accident or a search, but by a hiker's tip-off. Bones scattered in an old root hollow, shreds of burnt fabric still clinging, a toy car gripped between two finger bones. This, too, matched a 30-year-old missing person report connected to the area around the ravine. Rumors escalated among park staff. Some whispered about truckers or rangers seeing ghost headlights drifting along the ravine at night, winding up roads that no longer existed. Others blamed the pattern on a drifter, a killer who haunted the wild and used the fire to erase their trespasses. Older employees started admitting that sometimes radio calls came in after midnight, from numbers not assigned, requesting rescue, always cutting out with the same phrase, "It's not my car." Christian knew the rational explanations would never suffice. However, he also could not abandon the hunt for a logical answer. He requested closure notes from the state police. All 4 files ended with tragic ambiguity. Evidence pointed to homicide, but the identity of any perpetrator was as insubstantial as ash. One autumn evening, Christian returned to the ravine, haunted by his unanswered question. Why do these tragedies always surface here? Why do timelines not match? And why, out of all rangers, was he always the one to unearth them? The air was cold, carrying a dead leaf scent. As dusk fell, Christian listened to the hush, an almost whispered harmony in the trees. He felt, briefly, as though he was not alone. Up the bank, headlights flared. Christian spun, thinking another ranger had come to join him. But as he called out, the lights dimmed, and he realized they came from a slope on the old, closed trail, one that every record insisted had been erased years before. A silver car drifted slowly between dark trunks, ultimately vanishing as if pressed flat by mist. The after-image burned into his mind. He heard for a brief heartbeat, a child's laughter echoing unnaturally between the pines. When he blinked, the woods were empty. Yet the sense of presence stayed, stronger than dread, almost electric. Christian left not in fear, but in sadness. A deep certainty that this last encounter was not for him alone, but a warning for anyone who tried to map meaning on the wound left by decades of vanished travelers. He documented all of this. He wrote it in his log. He tried over the years to explain the cycle to the few who would listen, not only the physical strangeness, but the way the land remembered and seemed to defy closure. Years later, new rangers would find themselves on the same muddy slope, lifting another ruined car door or stepping with horror upon scorched fabric in the mud. Each time, it was as though the lost, drivers, passengers, even the cars themselves, had never truly left but were still trapped, waiting for recognition. The boundary between tragedy and the world above was permeable in the ravine, and Christian, like those who came before, understood that some stories never truly end. He left the job older, quieter, and sometimes, in retirement, he would be called back as a consultant when another vehicle was found. Each time, he advised care, respect, and silence for the lost, for the land, and for the peculiar wound that could not close so long as its secrets kept surfacing. If ever asked what he thought explained it, he always answered with a single phrase, one written in the margin of his old report long ago, and never shared except with those who listened with real intent. Some places do not forget. And in the park's southern ravine, beneath burned metal and tangled trees, the lost would sometimes return just long enough for a careful ranger to find them again. Audrey Russell understood the language of the forest. 20 years of hiking, camping, and volunteering with search and rescue had taught her to read the subtle messages in broken branches, the anxiety of disturbed wildlife, the quality of silence that fell before storms. When she accepted a seasonal ranger position at the park, she thought she had finally found her calling, a place where her instincts could be formalized, trusted, and put to meaningful use. She was wrong. It started on an ordinary evening in late autumn. Audrey was finishing her patrol loop, a 4-mile circuit through the lower trail system that she had walked dozens of times. The sun was bleeding orange across the western slope, and the temperature had begun its sharp drop into dusk. She was thinking about the reports she needed to file, the supply inventory due Monday, the endless bureaucratic rhythms that occupied half her mental space when she should have been focused on the forest. She noticed the other ranger as she rounded a bend near the old stone bridge. He was moving slowly, methodically, his uniform a faded olive that seemed to belong to another era. His trekking pole was worn smooth, and something about his gait was off. Not quite natural, as if he was learning to walk in that body rather than inhabiting it with years of practice. Audrey called out a greeting, professional but warm, the way colleagues do when they pass on duty. The ranger did not turn immediately. When he did, his face registered something that Audrey could not quite place. A flicker of calculation or recognition, or something she lacked words for. He nodded without speaking, his eyes lingering on her name tag. Up close, his uniform seemed actively decrepit, not merely worn, but degraded in ways that suggested decades of exposure. A button was missing. Seams had split and resplit. The fabric had taken on a mottled appearance, as though stained by something that would never fully wash out. "Long shift?" he asked, his voice thin and deliberate, each word shaped with effort. Audrey replied automatically, noting that he was filthy, earth streaked across his neck and hands, his fingernails blackened. She asked if he had been working a trail maintenance project, but he only smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. He mentioned her name again, unprompted, speaking it with an intonation that made her skin tighten. He said he knew she did good work, that rangers like her were what kept the system honest. He told her not to worry about reports being filed late, that some things required more time than others. Then he stepped aside, gesturing for her to pass, his gaze tracking her as she moved down the trail. Audrey walked faster than she meant to, aware of his presence receding but not truly leaving, as if his attention had weight and continued to press against her back. She reached the trailhead and her vehicle, and only then did she look back. He was not visible, though she had expected at some level that he would be standing at the precise point where she had last seen him, waiting. At the ranger station, she asked about the other ranger on duty. Her supervisor looked at her blankly. There was no other ranger scheduled for the lower trails that day. Audrey described him, the faded uniform, the trekking pole, his odd manner. Her supervisor's face went gray. He stood without speaking, moved to a filing cabinet, and withdrew a thick manila folder bound with rubber bands so old they had begun to crumble. Inside was a photograph, printed on paper that had yellowed and warped. "That ranger," her supervisor said quietly, "worked here in 1987. He was terminated that year for stalking female hikers. He made comments about their appearances, their routes, their routines. One woman filed a formal complaint. He was fired, stripped of his credentials. About a month later, he went hiking on the Eastern Trail and fell off a cliff. The fall was probably 200 feet. They never recovered his body. Audrey felt the ground shift beneath her. She looked at the photograph again, same faded uniform, same pale, unsettling eyes. The date on the photo was 1986. The ranger's name was printed below. Michael Garrett, Ranger ID 4387, terminated January 1987, presumed deceased April 1987. Over the following weeks, Audrey found herself hyper-aware of every shadow in the forest, every sound that might indicate a presence. She switched her patrol times, altered her routes, tried to make herself unpredictable. Yet wherever she went, she sometimes saw him. Not clearly, but at the periphery of her vision, always at a distance, always watching. Other rangers reported no sightings. No one else had encountered Michael Garrett on the trails. Then came the night that changed everything. Audrey was doing a final perimeter check, a task she usually skipped. But the unease had become almost unbearable. As she rounded the old stone bridge where she had first seen the ranger, she found him standing in the center of the span, motionless, his uniform somehow more solid now, more present. He smiled when he saw her, and for the first time, she understood that this was not a hallucination or a shared delusion among rangers. Something real, however impossible, stood before her. "I know you travel this way every evening," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of hunger. "I have watched where you go. I know your schedule better than you do. I know that you are careful, that you do not really trust anyone in this place. I like that about you. You understand caution. You understand that the forest is not as safe as people pretend." Audrey stepped back, her hand moving to her radio. Before she could transmit, Michael moved with an impossible speed, covering the distance between them in a stride that violated all physics. His hand closed around her wrist, and she felt the wrongness of him. Cold, but not the cold of a body exposed to elements. A different cold, one that seemed to emanate from absence. "You should not broadcast distress," he whispered. "You should not involve others. This is between us. I have waited so long for someone like you, someone aware, someone who would not dismiss what she saw." Audrey's survival instinct, honed by 2 decades of wilderness experience, overrode her paralysis. She brought her heel down on his foot with force, her second move a sharp strike to his throat. He did not react to either blow, no flinch, no recoil, no indication that he had felt anything at all. But his grip loosened, and that small window was enough. She ran, not toward the station, but deeper into the forest, using the darkness as cover. The terrain she knew intimately. She ran until her lungs screamed. When she finally stopped, gasping in a thicket of dense growth, she looked back and saw nothing. The forest around her was ordinary again, just trees and shadows and the ordinary dangers of the wild. She made it back to the station on shaking legs and immediately requested a transfer. Her supervisor did not try to convince her to stay. He only nodded, as if he had expected this outcome from the moment she arrived. "Some places," he said, "attract certain entities. Rangers who died with unfinished business sometimes linger." Michael was never resolved. He could not reconcile what he had become with what he had wanted. "I think he waits for someone like you, someone strong enough not to disappear, but observant enough to see him. When you leave, he will settle back into the trees." Audrey did leave. She took a position in a different state, working for a different park system, deliberately choosing an inland preserve far from the trails where she had encountered Michael. But the memory never left her. On foggy evenings, when mist gathered outside her window, she sometimes heard footsteps on the gravel nearby. She would tense, hand moving to her phone, though she never called. Years later, she received a message from her old supervisor. Another female ranger had filed a complaint about a ranger named Michael who had been stalking her on the lower trails. The description matched exactly. The supervisor assured her that precautions had been taken, that the new ranger understood the danger, that Michael had not escalated beyond surveillance. Audrey never responded to the message, but she added it to a file she had begun keeping, a record of sightings, incidents, close calls from other rangers at parks across the country. In the margins of her notes, she wrote a single line, repeated over and over. Some predators never die. They simply wait for new prey to wander into their territory. And in the deep forest where Michael Garrett had fallen, where his body was never found, rangers still reported seeing a figure in an outdated uniform, walking the trails at dusk, watching with eyes that carried no recognition of time or consequence. The Park Service maintained official silence on the matter, but among the rangers themselves, a whispered legend persisted. One about the ranger who could not be fired, who could not be fired, who had only grown more dangerous in death, and who would continue to haunt the trails for as long as the park endured.